Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav, and we will be learning today Mitzvah Hashem Daf Kuf Yud Tes Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn the halachas that apply to the Esrog, and we left off yesterday in the middle of a Mishnah Berurah here on Kuf Yud Tes Amud Aleph. So we're at Siman Tafresh Mem Ches Sif Chaf Aleph. We're in the middle of Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Samech Hey. Now that Mishnah Berurah begins on the bottom line of Kuf Yud Ches Amud Beis. However, we are holding in the Mishnah Berurah on Kuf Yud Tes Amud Aleph, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down in the Mishnah Berurah on Kuf Yud Tes Amud Aleph, where the Mishnah Berurah really picks up with a new topic. The Mishnah Berurah over here begins to discuss the question of an esrog that is murkov, an esrog that is grafted or otherwise mixed with other fruits. Says the Chavetz Chaim, esrog ha-murkov, hiskimu ha-paiskim, the paiskim reach a consensus. And if you take a look in Sharitzin, Ois Katan Ayin Aleph, the Chavetz Chaim brings down a long list of paiskim. The Levush, Maharam Padava, Maharam Alshich, Magen Avram, Shvos Yaakov, the Sma, the Taz, Chasam Sofer, Beis Meir, other Achrayim as well. Hiskimu ha-paiskim, the paiskim reach a consensus, shehu pasal, that an esrog which is murkov, an esrog that is grafted or otherwise blended with another fruit, is pasal, deloy mikri esrog klal. And the reason for the psal is, it is not considered an esrog. It's a new species. It's a blend between an esrog and a different fruit. Let's say between an esrog and a lemon. And the truth is that we know this as well to a certain extent. We eat fruits that are grafted and we call them by a new name. So we have a peach and then we have a nectarine. A nectarine, I think, is a blend between a peach and a plum. So we have all sorts of different oranges, some that are grafted with other fruits, and they have different names. So by blending the esrog and mixing it with another fruit, we are in essence creating a new species, and it is no longer the pre-Eitz Hadar that the Torah is looking for. And now the Chavetz Chaim describes what precisely a murkov is. Or murkov, what is this esrog ha-murkov that we're referring to? Hainu me esrog v'limoini. Let's say it's a blend between an esrog and a lemon. A pomeretz, or I assume this is a pomegranate, or you mix the esrog together with another fruit, this pomeretz. Oishum priacheres, or you mix it with another fruit. Afilu im hivrich anaf me'ilan esrog l'seich limoini. This would be a problem even if, let's say, you took the branch of an esrog tree and you grafted it onto a lemon tree. And now you want to use the fruit that grows on the branch from the esrog tree. So you might say to yourself, well, this is essentially an esrog. It's growing on the branch of an esrog tree. No, it's not, because now that it's grafted onto a lemon tree, it's no longer a pure esrog. Now it's a blend between an esrog and a lemon. The cholshikade, certainly, im hivrech anaf me'ila limoini, if you take a branch from a lemon tree and you graft it toich ilan esrog onto an esrog tree, now you're getting the fruit essentially from the lemon branch. So it's even more so that it's a problem. Aval, however, says the Mishnah Berurah here in the brackets, im hirkiv mishnei ilane esrog biyachat. But let's say you want to graft two esrog trees together. Kagain, for example, anaf ilan, you want to take the branch of a tree, of an esrog tree. Sheperoisav dakim, you have an esrog tree that produces very small esrogim, dakim, thin, uketanim, and small. L'seich ilan sheperoisav gasim. You want to take a branch from that tree that produces small esrogim, and you want to graft it onto a tree that produces larger esrogim. That, the Chavetz Chaim says, is kosher, because now you're not blending two different species together, you're blending two esrog trees together. So what? It's all esrogim. He brings this down from the Eliyah Rabbah in the name of the Bach. Now, the Chavetz Chaim starts to go into a discussion of how do you know if an esrog is a murkov or not. Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'yesh shloisha simanim, there are 3 signs, shenucha lahakir imhu murkov oiloi, that you could use to take a look at an esrog and decide if the esrog is murkov or it's not. What are these 3 simanim? Aleph, the first siman is, ki murkov chalak, an esrog that is murkov, an esrog that's blended together with another fruit, the surface of the esrog will be relatively smooth. V'lo esrog, but a pure esrog, blitois ktanois b'chol gufa, has small blitois, small protrusions on its entire body, on its entire surface, v'goiv alohem, and they are raised. So, if we take a look at my esrog that I have over here, we can see that the surface of the esrog has bumps all over it. It's rough. Those are the blitois. If you take an esrog, take a look at a lemon. A lemon is also yellow, it's also a citrus fruit, but the surface is completely smooth. Says the Chavetz Chaim over here, and these simanim, if you look in the Sharetzion, Ois Katan Ayin Gimel, these are brought down from the Shalos Teshuvos of the Ramah in the name of the Maram Padova. So he says the first siman is that the murkov will lose the blitos. The murkov has a smooth outer skin. Beis, what's the second siman? Ha murkov ha'oikitz boilate. When you have an esrog that's a murkov, the ukitz of the esrog. Now bear in mind that this esrog that I'm holding is already an old, shriveled up esrog. And when that happens, the ukitz starts to be boiled. It starts to protrude from the fruit even more. So this actually looks like the ukitz is very boiled. Originally it wasn't. But on a murkov, the ukitz, the bottom of the esrog comes to a tip, and the ukitz extends outwards. On an esrog, the ukitz is somewhat shakua. It's somewhat sunken in to the bottom of the esrog, so that the bottom of the esrog kind of comes in like this, and then the ukitz is in there. So hamurkov ha'ukitz boilet, by an esrog that's murkov, the ukitz tends to extend outwards. Ube'esrog ha'ukitz shoikeya, and on a pure esrog, the ukitz is usually more shakua. What's the third siman? Ki toich hamurkov rochav. The inside of an esrog hamurkov, the chadre hazera. I don't have my cut open esrog here anymore, but if you remember, we cut open an esrog, and inside you have the thick white rind, and then at the center you have the flesh of the fruit that kind of looks like the interior of a lemon. That area on a murkov, ki toich hamurkov rochav. When you're dealing with an esrog that's a murkov, that inner flesh of the esrog is very big. It takes up the vast majority of the interior of the esrog. It's big and wide. V'hamoil shaloi, and the juice of the chadre azera, the white rind, is not juicy. The juice is in the chadre azera. By a murkov, v'hamoil shaloi hu rav. It has a lot of juice inside the chadre azera. V'aklipa hamimutzas, and the middle klipa, the middle layer, the middle peel, if you will, of the esrog, which is that white rind. And again, if you remember, when you peel a citrus fruit, like a lemon or an orange, you have the outer orange peel of an orange or yellow peel of a lemon. And then right inside that, you have a thin white rind. But on an esrog, there's the outer yellow peel, and then the white rind is very thick. On a murkov, the white rind is not thick. On a murkov, the white rind is thin. That's what the Mishnah Berurah says here. Haklipa habimutzas, the middle layer, that's the white rind that is in between the outer skin and the chadre azera. Dahainu beit klipa elyoina. This is the white layer that's between the outer peel, shehidaka kiglid, which is thin like a skin. Ubein atoich, and the center of the esrog, shehein chadre azera, the center which is the chadre azera im klipasan, daka. That white rind is thin on a murkov. Ube esrog ulahepech. And by an esrog, it's quite the opposite. Ki aklipa ova, on an esrog, that white rind is thick. V'atoich kotzer, and the center of the esrog, the flesh, the chadre azera, are very small. V'hu kima'at yavesh. And also, it's pretty dry. The Chadrei Azera does not contain a lot of juice by a pure Esrog. Excuse me. So here again, we had three different simanim. We had the first siman, which is that the murkov does not have blitos. The murkov does not have bumps on the exterior. It tends to be smooth. We had the second siman, which is the ukitz, the stem at the bottom of the esrog. On a murkov, it is very much extended outward. By a pure esrog, it tends to be shakua. It tends to be sunken into the bottom of the esrog. And now the third one, the third siman, you could only tell if you cut into the esrog. Now, if you cut into the esrog, you're going to make the esrog chasar, and for sure, for the first day of Yom Tov, this esrog would be puzzle. So you really cannot use this siman unless you're going to cut into the esrog in a way that won't render it puzzle, and you'll use it for the rest of Yom Tov, not on the first day. So I'm not sure what the value of this last siman is, although there could be another value, which is if you have a tree and you're trying to ascertain whether this tree is a murkov tree or a non-murkov tree, you could pick one esrog off the tree, cut it open, and see what it looks like at the center. But on the murkov, the fleshy chadrei zera at the center is very big, very wide. It takes up almost all of the interior of the fruit, like a lemon or an orange. And by an esrog, it's only at the center. It's relatively small, the chadrei zera, and dry. Now in the brackets, the Mishnah Berurah brings down a fourth possible siman. Uba Oyla Shabbos, the Sefer Oyla Shabbos, Kasav Oid Siman, is brought down another siman. Sheba Esrog, that by an Esrog, Hagarin, the seed of the Esrog, Zokuf La'orech HaEsrog, tends to be standing up in line with the length and the height of the Esrog. Uva murkov, and by an Esrog that's a murkov, Hagarin Mushkav L'Roichav HaEsrog. The seed is in the other direction. It tends to be lying down across the width of the esrog. So again, another siman that you could only tell if you actually cut the esrog open. However, the Mishnah Berurah brings down, Ubebekura Yaakov Kasav, the Bekura Yaakov writes, Shepatak be'esrogim haragilim etzleinu, that he did a bedika, he checked at the esrogim that we commonly have, v'sheyesh lehem kol simani esrog kosher, and he chose esrogim that have all of the first three simanim that we mentioned, all three simanim that point to a kosher esrog, and yet he found that sometimes the seeds are taka aligned with the height and the length of the esrog, like the Oyla Shabbos says, and sometimes they're actually laying down across the width of the esrog, which the Oyla Shabbos said is a siman of a murkov. Ayin Sham. Falkade, and therefore the Bekura Yaakov says, Al Yudei Siman Zeh Ef Shalahavchin Klal. The Bekura Yaakov says that this fourth siman is not a valid siman. It's not a valid indicator of whether the esrog is murkov or not, because it seems to be very unreliable. Okay. So far we had over here that a murkov is puzzle, and we had three simanim how to tell if the esrog is a murkov or not. However, the Mishnah Berurah now brings down the Chasam Sofer. The Kasab B'Tshuvas Chasam Sofer, it's brought down, it's written in the Tshuvas Chasam Sofer, Chelik Arachaim Simikuf Pei Gimel, Esrogim Sheyesh Lehem Simonim Shemi Bachutz. Chasam Sofer, in that Tshuva, says that if you have an esrog that has the proper simonim on the outside, dahainu, this means, Hoketz Shakua, the oketz, the stem, is taka sunken into the bottom of the esrog. Ublitois harbit, and the taka has a lot of blitois, which is exactly the first two simanim that we saw. So the simanim shemi bachutz, the simanim that you could see from the outside of the esrog, they indicate that this esrog is a non-murkov. The oketz is shakua, and the esrog has blitois. Chasam Sofer says, Ein lachu shemi yomotze basimanim apnimim hefech mizeh. You do not have to worry, well, maybe if I cut the esrog open, I'll find out that the chadrei zera are very big. That was the third siman, and that would indicate that it's a murkov. Says the Chasam Sofer, if you have the two outer simanim that both indicate that the esrog is kosher, then you don't have to worry about the third siman that you could only see if you cut the esrog open. Now the Mishnah Berurah says, "Umashma mizeh." The implication of this Chuvas Chasam Sofer is, the Chasam Sofer said, if you have both of the outer simanim, the ukitz is shakua, and it has blitos, then you don't have to worry about the third interior sim. Mashma mizeh, the implication of this is, the im yesh lo rak siman echad, if it only has one of the outer simanim, shemoire shehu esrog, that indicates that it's a kosher esrog, va'asiman hasheni moire shehu murkov, but the second outer siman indicates that the esrog is problematic, that it's a murkov. Kigoyin, for example, shehu chalak. Let's say you have an esrog that doesn't have blitos. Well, that indicates that it may very well be a murkov. But v'ha'ukit shaloi shakeh, but the stem is sunken into the bottom, and that indicates that it's a non-murkov. So here you have an esrog. You have two outer simanim. One indicates that it's kosher. One indicates that it's murkov. Yesh lahachmer misveika. Then the Chasam Sofer would seem to hold that you should be machmir, because you have two of the simanim that you could see. One indicates it's kosher. One indicates that it's puzzle, and the third one, Yavei Akasar Ashlishi V'Achriya Beineim, you don't know what that third siman is, because you'll only know if you cut the esrog open. So in that case, the Chasam Sofer seems to be saying that you should be machmir misafik and you should not use it. Now that's what we see from the Chasam Sofer in the Tshuva in Arachayim Siman Kuf Pegim. And V'chein Kasab Amaru Kitzia, and the Sefer Amaru Kitzia says this as well. However, continues the Chasam Sofer, B'Siman Reish Zayin, in Siman Reish Zayin, Mefakvei Kachasam Sofer Ma'oid, the Chasam Sofer takes great issue Be'inyan HaSimanim, when it comes to the topic of these simanim. The Chasam Sofer takes very strong issue with the validity of these simanim. Acharei shaloi nizkaru b'shas, because the Chasam Sofer says, where are we getting these simanim from? They're not from Shas, they're not brought down in the Gemara, so the Chasam Sofer is not happy with these simanim. V'daitoi, and he expresses his opinion over there in Siman Reish Zayin, de la Maisa, that when it comes to halacha la Maisa, ein lismach al simanim klal lahakal. We should not rely on these simanim at all to be mekel and to decide that an esrog is a kosher esrog and that it's a non-murkov. Now, in the Shar Tzion, Ois Katan Ayin Daled, the Chavetz Chaim says, well, you'll tell me, the Chasam Sofer is saying that we cannot rely on these simanim to be mekel, which means to decide that an esrog where we don't know its origin, we don't know for sure, we don't know its provenance. We don't know, does it come from a tree that we know is non-murkov, or is it possible that it's murkov? Chasam Sofer says you want to rely on these simanim to be mekel and use the esrog, you cannot rely on these simanim because they're not found in Shas. Well, in that case, the Chavetz Chaim wonders, so why does the Chuvas HaRamah tell me these simanim? If I can't rely on them, so what's the point? So in Ois Katan Ayin Daled, the Shar Tzion says, Umad Diniskuru HaSimanim, if you're wondering, so why do we have these simanim? Hainu, it would only be she'im ba echad va'amar. If an esrog soicher comes and he says she'esrogim shaloi hu mimakom shemachzakim ha'esrogim shaloi le'enam murkavim. You have an esrog soicher comes to town and he testifies on the provenance of his esrogim. He says, I got these esrogim. These are Yanava esrogim. Now Yanava esrogim are muchzak, not to be murkavim. By the way, in case you're wondering where Yanav is the Italian port city of Genoa. That's where Yanav is. So, an esrog soicher comes, and he says, these are Yanava esrogim. But then you look at the esrogim, v'asimanim marin lehepech. But you look at these esrogim, and they don't have blitus, and the ukitz is not shakua, ein oinemon. The Chasam Sofer says, you want to know why the Chuvas HaRamah gave us these simanim. The Chuvas HaRamah gave us these simanim. So if a new esrog soicher comes to town and he says, I'm selling Yanava esrogim that are muchzik to come from a location where the esrogim are not murkavim, and now you look at these esrogim and they don't have the simanim of einon murkavim, they don't have blitus, the ukitz is not shakua, then you don't trust him. You send him packing. But in any case, we see over here that the Chazam Sofer says that we should not rely on these simanim to be mekel. We should not rely on these simanim at all to be mekel and to paskin on Esrogim that they're not murkov. And continues the Mishnah Berurah, the name of the Chazam Sofer, V'dinan shel Esrogim, and halacha lamaisa, the halacha of an esrog is kedin oif tahar, the same halacha that we apply to an oif tahar, to a kosher a bird. How do we decide if a bird is kosher? We have to have a Masorah. That's why there are some people who are machmir not to eat turkeys. They say that we don't have a klara Masorah on turkeys, that a turkey is a kosher a bird. So on a bird, we don't have simanim, clear simanim like we do on cattle. On birds, we need to have a Masorah. Says the Chazam Sofer that an esrog also needs a Masorah. Kedin oif tahar denekal b'Masorahs. Dahainu, this means she'oisai hamokaim, the location that the esrog came from, yiyamuchsik miyamim kadmainim. It has to have a chazaka miyamim kadmainim from early times. She'esrogayim enam murkovim, that the esrogim that come from that location are not murkov. You have to have a Masorah. Umisayim sham, and the Chazam Sofer concludes over there. Ha'oile mizeh, what comes out of this discussion is kol ha'esrogim she'enam miyanava, all of the esrogim that are not from Yanava. The Genoan esrogim, we have a Kabbalah that they're not murkovim, but any other esrogim, says the Chazam Sofer, v'hu adin makam achar ha'muchzik b'kashrus b'yamim kadmonim, or other than Yanav, you might have another place that has an ancient tradition that those esrogim are not murkovim. Any other esrogim, says the Chazam Sofer, ein likach, you should not purchase them, bali ksav heksher, without a letter attesting to their kashrus, sheyadeya hameid, where the one who's testifying knows she'ena mea murkovim, that these esrogim are not murkovim. Ve'ein lisbach ala simanim, and we should not rely on simanim alone. So Esrog Soicher comes to town, you should not pick up the esrogim and say, well, it's got blitas, the ukis is shakua, I guess it's a kosher esrog, it's not murkov. No, if you don't know where this esrog comes from, you have to have a heksher that attests to the fact that this esrog comes from a place where the esrogim are not murkov. Ad kan l'shoyna. Ukein zeh kosav gamke b'sefer shlois chayim b'siman ayin reish ayin sham. However, says the Chavetz Chaim, b'yom tov sheni shehu d'Rabbanon, from the second day of Yom Tov and on, when the mitzvah of Dalaminim is a D'Rabbanon, not a D'Oraisa, yesh lismach ala simanim, then we can rely on the simanim. Af laman d'sfir le'dikam b'yom tov sheni pasal murkov ayin sham. Even according to those paiskim who hold that there is a psul of murkov the rest of Yom Tov as well. But you could rely on the simanim at least for the rest of Yom Tov, but not for the first days. Okay, however, be'emes, the truth is, says the Chavetz Chaim, oidois ksav ha'hechsher yesh gam kein harbe l'daktek. It's not so simple to just rely on a letter, on a certificate of kashrus either. And he gives two reasons. First of all, Aleph, she'tzarech limtzai anoshim she'akiru heitev chasimas hameid. What's the letter worth if nobody recognizes the signature of the Rav HaMakshir? Somebody comes with a letter from some Rav HaMakshir in Eretz Yisrael. Do you know if the Ksav Hechshir is real? Do you recognize the signature? Is it a handwritten signature? Is it a printed letter? What is it? You have to know that it's for real. Alternately, I'll call upon him. At least, at least the Esrog Soicher has to recognize the writing on the letter and know that it's for real. The who and the Esrog Soicher himself, has to be somebody that we recognize and we trust. So that's the first concern, that the Chavetz Chaim has with the validity of a letter of Heksher. Beis, second of all, that's the first concern is when an Esrog Seicher comes and he's selling Esrogim and he has a letter that attests the provenance of the Esrogim. So again, an Esrog Seicher comes and he says, these are Yanava Esrogim. How does he know that they're Yanava Esrogim? So he has a letter attesting to the fact that they're Yanava Esrogim, and Yanava Esrogim have a chazaka that they're not murkovim. So says the Chavetz Chaim, that's all fine and dandy, but you have to know that the letter is authentic. Or at least the Seicher has to know that the letter is authentic, and then we have to know that the Seicher is trustworthy. We have to know who this Seicher is, we have to know that he's trustworthy. Beis, second of all, let's say the Esrog Seicher comes, and he's not attesting to the provenance of the Esrog. He's not saying, this is a Yanava Esrog, and therefore you could trust that it's not murkov. Instead, laha'id she'ena murkovim. What he is doing is he's saying, I'm attesting to the fact that these Esrogim are not murkov. I'm not telling you that they came from a location that has a chazaka that they're not murkovim. No, but I'm telling you that these Esrogim, they come from a kfar whatever in Eretz Yisrael, or they come from California, or they come from Mexico. So those are not places that have an ancient Kabbalah that they're not murkov, but I'm telling you these California Esrogim are not murkov. So that's, you're trusting him on a different point. The first point we were trusting on was that it comes from Yanav. Now we're trusting him not that it comes from a place that's muksik, it comes from a place that's not muksik. Now we have to trust him that he knows that these California Esrogim are not murkovim. So ala Esrogim she'ena machzakim b'kvar b'kashrus, if we're dealing with Esrogim that do not come from a place where there's a cheskas kashrus on those Esrogim, laha'id she'ena murkovim, and you want to trust him that these Esrogim are not murkov, lazeh ein lahamid lahameid, for that you cannot trust the one who's giving the testimony, rakim ha'muchzik b'kashrus. He has to have, then the one giving the testimony has to have a real cheskas kashrus. V'tzarach sheyeh yirei shamayim, we have to know that he's a yirei shamayim, l'daktek, to be careful, du'ulai mitei katoy, maybe he's making a mistake. U'beprat b'maleches hanetiyah, is he a farmer? Does he know agriculture? Does he know what he's talking about? Or is he a yid from the Medrash who might be a very nice fellow, a very trustworthy fellow? But maybe the people growing the Esrogim are pulling the wool over his eyes. He doesn't know anything. He doesn't know the first thing about agriculture. Gam motzi oid kama remiyos b'inyan zeh. Chavetz Chaim also says there's a lot of trickery that goes on in these inyanim. Shuhu maniach ksav hechsher al teva akas. Could be that the certificate was put on one box, and then after the Esrog Seicher sold that box, he puts it on a different box. Therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, yesh l'daktek, we should be very careful, liktais ve'ish nemon, to purchase Esrogim from trustworthy individuals. If you do have the ability to buy an Esrog from a place that does have an ancient Kabbalah that is not a murkov, it would be better to buy that type of Esrog. Very interesting Sharatzion Ois Cotton Ayin Vav over here, who says, the wholesalers need to know if they have a choice to buy their Esrogim from two different places. Echad mi-Yisraelim, on the one hand they could buy from Yidden, ve'echad mi-Nachrim, or they could buy from non-Jews, u'shneihem be'inyani heksher heim shavim, and both of them have the same level of heksher. So you have an Italian who's selling Genoan Esrogim, and it's not the Italian that you're trusting. You have fine machshirim and everything else, and you're just, it's owned, the Esrog orchard is owned by this Italian fellow, and you have a choice. You could buy these Italian Esrogim from this Italian person, or you could buy from a Yid. So then, says the Chavetz Chaim, Yikdu mi-Yisraelim, you should buy from the Yid. U'kamay diksiv, like it says in the Pasuk, Ay kanay miyad amisecha. Uperish Rashi, and Rashi says, V'umei sifra, he's bringing from a sifra, im terza likdais, when you want to purchase something, Kenei min Yisrael chaverecha, give parnasa to a Yid. So this is something that the Sharetzion saw fit to bring down over here in hilchos daled minim, but it applies to everything. Really, when you have the opportunity to give a yid parnasa and buy from a yid, buy from a yid. Why are you buying from a non-Jew? I always wanted to say that that's part of Pshat in the Gemara in Brachas. The Gemara in Brachas says that the Chachmei Yisrael would come into David HaMelech in the morning, and they would tell David HaMelech, Amcha Yisrael tzrichit parnasa. They would tell David HaMelech that we have a problem with Klal Yisrael. There are poor people that need parnasa. And David HaMelech said, Leichum espardas zumizu. They should go do business one with the other. What was David HaMelech's great eitzah over here? I think part of David HaMelech's eitzah was, if a person doesn't have parnasa, he should go do business with another yid. Why should he go do business with another yid? Because then, even if this person doesn't have a schus that the Rebbe Shem should give him parnasa, but if he's doing business with another yid, then maybe the schus of that yid will flow over to him, and he'll get parnasa from doing business with the other yid. But we should always try to help out other fellow yidden. So we should do parnasa with other yid. Continues the Mishnah Berurah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 lines from the bottom of the page at the end of the line. V'ayin be'bi'er halacha. The Mishnah Berurah says, take a look at the bi'er halacha. Masha kasavdu b'shem ha'bekura Yaakov. What we wrote over there in the name of the Bekura Yaakov. And he is referring, I forgot, he's referring to... Yeah, the Bekura Yaakov says that the Esrogim that would grow in his locales, in the gardens of the Sarim, the nobles had gardens. The Bekura Yaakov said, Kulam murkavim heim. Aval oisam shabam me'Italia, the Italian Esrogim, they have Suffolk murkavim, so l'chayr yesh ksherim imi yefshal achriya. The nasal basa ruba, you could call basa raiv. Okay. Ulafi hamavur sham nira debedievet. We're going back to the Mishnah Berurah. Ulafi hamavur sham nira debedievet kishakvar kana bedievet when you bought an esrog. Aisha ein lo mekaymes hayidum l'machzakim, or you don't have the opportunity to buy an esrog from a location where there is a chazaka. Nira de yuchal lispach al shtei simanim sheba bechutz. It seems that you could rely on the two outer simanim, the blitus and the uketz being shakua, ulevarech and to make a bracha. Gamkein. Ukamoshe kasafti lamayla. V'dan, you should know she'eskimo achrayim. The achrayim have a consensus. The yesh lahachmer le'inyan esrog hamurkov afilu b'sha'ar yamim. That you should be machmer not to use a murkov even the rest of Yom Tov, not just the first day. V'emein loy acher be'ir. If the only esrog you have is a murkov, yesh litloi kol shiva b'loy bracha. There are those that say that you could take it all 7 days without making a bracha, at least as a zecher to the mitzvah. The yesh machmirin, however, there are those that are machmer, the taz, the pri begadim, the afilu litloi b'loy bracha gam kein kedai. You shouldn't even take a murkov without a bracha. Del masil misrach lotzeis by tamid, because from there might come a michshol, you might come to use it other years as well. Olinyan hadasim, when it comes to hadasim, you don't even think of murkov when it comes to hadasim, right? Says the Chavetz Chaim, olinyan hadasim, im yodea shehem murkovim. If you know that the hadasim are murkavim, that they were blended together with some other type of tree, ein litar loisam, you should not use them. The psulim heim k'may esrogim, because the psul of murkav exists by the hadasim as well. Ach b'stama mashmei ma'achrayim she'en lachish. But the achrayim seem to say that you don't have to worry about it. The stama ain't on murkavim, because by the esrog, there's a very strong incentive to make murkavim. Because you want to make a beautiful esrog. It's hard to get a beautiful esrog, but if you graft it together with a lemon, it makes it a lot easier. By the hadasim, there doesn't seem to be the incentive to do this. And therefore, a stam hadas, you don't have to worry that it's murkov. Ayin b'pri begadim is b'taf reish b'tes oisyut beis u'mashiratza ashvos Yaakov lifsa loisan like dela begina is hasarim nechshash murkavim. The hadasim that grow by the sarim, the Shvos Yaakov wants to say the apostle cholko alav chacham tzvi disagrees v'apadim meiros v'ayin b'bekura Yaakov shekasar shekei pasha debin glach shira. Okay, so the hadasim we could assume that they're kosher. Okay, that was a very long Mishnah Berurah. Now, let's finally come to the last sif of this wonderful, very enjoyable Siman Tafresh Mem Ches that has been discussing Esrogim. Now we go to the very bottom, the last word on Kuf Yud Ches Amid Beis. Shulchan Aruch Sif Chav Beis. Shir Esrig Koton. What is the minimum shear of an esrog? Now, why is there a minimum shear of an esrog? Well, in Sif Chav Aleph, we discussed a green esrog. And we said that a very green esrog is possible. Why? Because we said we're afraid that this esrog might be so immature that it's never going to fully ripen. And an esrog that's never going to fully ripen is not a gemar peri. It's not a viable fruit. And the pasuk says, "Ulakaktem lachem pri eitz hadar." We need a fruit. We need a peri. This immature esrog that's never going to fully develop is not a peri. It never reached gemar peri, and therefore it's possible. So too by a very small esrog. It's possible that an esrog is so small that it's not considered a peri. So the Shulchan Aruch says, sheer esrog cotton. What is the minimum size of an esrog? Pachas bikabeitza pasul. If it's smaller than an egg, it's pasul. Aval kabeitza. But if it is as big as an egg, afilu imu beiser. Even if it is an immature esrog, sha'adayin loy nigmar perah. It's still, if you would leave it on the tree, it still would grow. It's not a full-sized esrog. But it's the size of a kibbutz, it's the size of an egg. Kosher, it's still kosher. Says the Mishnah Berurah, bottom line on Kuf Yud Tes Amud Aleph, Eis Katan Samach Vav, pasul. An esrog that's smaller than a beitza is pasul. Va'afilu im anu mishar. Even if we could tell, she'einenu boiser, we could tell that this is not an immature esrog. It's not a non-viable esrog. She'ein anu misharim she'einenu boiser. It's not boiser. She'ein sofer lehiskadol yoiser. It's not an esrog that's never going to reach full size. Afilu hachi pachas b'shezeh lechashiv gemar perah. This is not considered, if it's that small, it's not a gemar perah. In other words, what the Mishnah Berurah is saying is like this. You would think that the problem over here is that it's not a fully viable fruit. Now, what did we say by green? By green, we said, if the esrog is green, but you know that it's going to turn yellow, the esrog is kosher. Why? Because that's enough of a gemar peri that it's called a peri. It's a fully viable esrog. It is going to reach the full normal color of an esrog, even though it might take time. But it doesn't matter. It's a fully viable esrog. It might not turn yellow until after Sukkot, but it doesn't matter. That's a peri. So maybe over here, we should say the same thing. Maybe we should say, yeah, it's true. This esrog is very small. It's smaller than a beitza. But we know that it is going to grow full size. So maybe I could use it. No. By size, there's a fixed size. If it's smaller than a beitza, you can't use it. It has to be bigger than a beitza. That's what the Mishnah Berurah is saying here. Nice cut and samach vav. Aval yesh by ashir. If it is the size of an esrog, of an egg, chashiv kiperi, it's considered a peri. Afsho adayin beiser, shesoifel is kadol yoiser, even though it's not full grown. Okay. Ice cut and samach zayin. If it's the size of an egg, kosher. Or bavad shelo yayar kikarti. But it shouldn't be green like a leek. To us like chashiv gemar perah, because that's not called a gemar perah. Kol she'ein chayzel amar esrog. If you don't know for sure that it's going to turn yellow, the chanal b'sif chav aleph, like we saw yesterday in sif chav aleph. Okay, finally, let's go to the top line of Kuf Yud Tes Amud Beis and complete this siman. We spoke about a small esrog. How about a very large esrog? I remember being in Eretz Yisrael and seeing an esrog that looked like a small watermelon. I had to hold it with 2 hands. V'em haya gadol kol shehu kosher. The Mechaber says an esrog, no matter how big it is, kosher, it's kosher. Says the Mishnah Berurah, kol shehu hainu afilu hu gadol shebeviyah ksefah. Even if it's so big that you got to carry it on your shoulder, gam ken yotza, you still could be yotza with such an esrog. Why? This is a very interesting halacha that will take many of you by surprise, but we'll see it later on in Siman Tafresh Nun Aleph. Kevin shahar ba minim. The halacha by daled minim is you don't really have to hold all 4 of them at the same time. If you have all 4, you have a lulav, you have a dasim, a ravas, and an esrog, all laying in front of you on the table. Yachal lital of halulav achakach esrog. You could be yotze the mitzvah by picking up the lulav, without hadasim and aravas, making a bracha on the lulav, having in mind all the other minim. You take the lulav, then you put it down, pick up the hadasim, put them down, pick up the aravas, put them down, pick up the esrog, put it down. You can be yotzei the mitzvah that way. So therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, even if you have an esrog that's so big that you got to carry it on the shoulder, so wait a second, how are you going to take all the dalaminim at one time? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, the halacha is you don't have to take all dalaminim at one time. That halacha surprises a lot of people. We'll see it later on in Siman Taf Reish Nun Aleph. Okay, that brings us to the end of Siman Taf Reish Mem Ches. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Schos of limud HaTorah should be begging on God's Klal Yisrael. The Rosh should send Yeshua for us parnasset shidduchim to all of the need, and we should be zeicher to see the BS Kal Tzedek. B'meher of Yameinu. Amen. Be well.